Cool. So yeah, we're gonna talk about maybe some stuff related to active inference, which you've been writing a big post about. Maybe some stuff related to your manifesto.
Yeah.
Um, uh, maybe, uh, yeah. What else is on your mind, Sheik?
What else is on my mind? I mean, those are big. I'd be curious to know more about what you're up to too.
Mm,
Like, yeah, like I I don't want this to be like too one-sided.
right, like an interview of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I'm up to is I've started running this thing I'm calling experimental church. Like Jess and I, my wife, are running it together, and uh,
What are you calling it? Because you cut off for a
oh,
second.
experimental church.
Cool.
Um, which is a way to kind of highlight, okay, it's like it's sort of traditional in the sense that church is sort of inherently, I don't know, traditional. It's like it's got a lineage. It's riffing on Christianity and so forth, but it's not a Christian church per se. Like it's not sort of it's not trying to be a form of Christianity. It's attempting to be a entirely new thing that has its roots in Christianity. Sort of like how Christianity is not a form of Judaism. It's like it's a different thing. Um, but it feels cool because we have a bunch of like Christian lineage, both like in terms of the actual religion as our family, in terms of our families, but also in terms of like the uh the entirety of Western civilization has a Christian lineage in its sense of what morality even is, and sense of all of that, um and a Greek lineage too. The ancient Greeks kind of got folded into Christianity at multiple points, but yeah, so that feels like a cool project and kind of like related to your manifesto and so forth.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, one of the things that I thought would be nice first steps as like things to do for this mission is like make a map of what people around me are doing and people not around me and just projects that feel uh relevant. So would love to hear more. Like I'd especially be interested in like how you're approaching it. Like what's like yeah, what like concrete steps have you taken yet? What sorts of practices have you experimented with, if any?
Yeah. I mean, it's been an interesting experience where like the the church itself has been, so we've run, I don't know, 7 or 8 services now, and we haven't done a lot outside of run church services. We're sort of just like, okay, experimentally, church services. What what would a church service look like that I would be wholeheartedly wanting to go to? And that's kind of been the design criterion, because Jess and I were checking out some other churches, and we were sort of like, we'd show up and there'd be elements that we liked, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was kind of bullshit or something, like that there was just you know it's like and even like looking around and being like, do you guys believe this stuff? Like um and so in a way, like we've been really going hard at 2 dimensions, which is like having it be something that's worth showing up to, that's like enjoyable, that people are like, yes, I like this, I want to go, this feels good, I want, I like the idea of bringing my children here, or if I have children, I like want to bring my children here. I mean, we don't exactly have like kids programming the way that some churches do, like Sunday school. I don't have any of that sorted out, but that it feels like the kind of place that's like wholesome, like I want, like wants
Yeah.
to have families in it. Because in a way, like what a church is it's a whole that's made out of smaller holes, and those smaller holes are families. Which is contrasted with like a company is a whole made out of smaller holes, and those smaller holes are teams. Like, oh, that's a different kind of like fractal shape. And the natural subunit of a church is a family, or something. And so so that's criterion number one, is that people enjoy it and like going to it and sort of just want to be there, and having good singing, good prayers and practices and stuff is part of that. And then priority number two is having it feel entirely sincere, like
Yeah.
no bullshit, no kind of oh, there's some obscure word I'm looking for, but like kind of opaquely kind of burying subtle confusion or dogma or whatever, like to have it be wholly sincere. And one of the kind of I would say sort of founding refrains of the church is maybe we can figure it out together, is one of the names of God.
Hmm.
And there was one point when actually after we did a couple of readings, one of them from the Bible and one of them from I don't know, some book. We often have like a Christian reading or some sort of Bible reading and a memetics reading, because the whole part of the point of the church is to be a memetics aware church, like for people to be literate to memetics, to be aware of how memes evolve and how like information doesn't just get handed down from on high and be true. It gets constantly reinterpreted and changed and so forth. And the evolving word. I'm just struck by that as a way to kind of capture sort of, as opposed to like the word as like this static thing. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so we finished the readings, and it's often in some churches there's kind of a refrain, like after you have the readings, the pastor or whoever did the readings will say the word of God, and then the congregation says thanks be to God. And there was one particular time when we got to the end of the second reading, and I I just kind of, without even really thinking about it, blurted out the word of maybe we can figure it out together. And everyone was like, thanks be to maybe we can figure it out together. And it was like, oh yeah, like this is, it's a bit cheesy, but it's like it's not cringe. Like it is, we actually mean it. Like there's a real like, yeah, aliveness to it. Yeah. So that's been really cool. And I think there's a lot more work to do in terms of like clarifying theology, metaphysics, ethics, like what is the, insofar as the church is going to have any sort of like organizing principle to it, not just like some practices that it does or whatever, but like an actual sense of like this is how we move in the world. It's like how do we get clear on what that is and what type of thing that even is, because it's not going to be a set of rules, right? So what is it? Okay, a set of understandings, that's closer. A set of shared, a shared sense of things is like how I've come to be wanting to talk about it. I basically don't believe in beliefs anymore. I'm just like, nah, like you have a sense of things. You can describe that sense of things with propositions. Those propositions can be misleading or not misleading. They can be honest or not honest, but like things can be honest and misleading. And so whether or not they're true, I'm like, does it work? Does it feel right? Does it fit? Does it like, and I feel like I'm sort of getting at some of the roots of what it means to know things in a pretty satisfying way.
Hmm. Wait, it feels like you're using belief in a more specific way than I'm used to. Because like to me, belief is just, I'm expecting, yeah, belief is like some knowledge of some pattern, right? Like I'm
Yeah, the thing I'm
like
pointing at,
observation A to follow B.
yeah, so I guess I think basically what I'm saying is like it's not like belief doesn't refer to some stuff that is there on some level, but I think it's a confused category. Like a lot of what we mean when we say belief is tends towards the propositional, and that seems to me to be like sort of like a kind of like a special case that applies in narrow situations or something, but it's sort of like if you have well-defined properties, then like you can have facts about stuff and then you can have beliefs about those facts or something. But like only once you've sort of built up a whole edifice of a framework. And
Yeah.
like as an organism, you mostly are not actually doing that. What you mostly are doing is having a sense of what's going on. And then additionally, having a sense of what people say is going on. And belief allows us to kind of equivocate between those two in a way that I think is very bad. Um,
Okay. Yeah. So when you use the word belief, you meant like propositions taken. So when you use the word belief, you meant one, propositions that apply to like some like formal system that is like mistakenly taken to be true by someone who's like not realizing that concepts are empty and leaky and like don't
yeah,
matter.
that and also just like the way that people will then I mean it's everything. I don't know. People are like, I believe in, Jesus Christ. What do you mean? What are you talking about there? Like what like where is this Jesus Christ? Point at him. Not like I'm not suggesting you should be able to point at him with your finger, but what is that? What is your sense of things? Tell me about your
Yeah.
sense of things. And if you're not telling me about your sense of things, then don't tell me you believe something. Tell me somebody told you it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if somebody tells you something, either it becomes part of your sense of things. Like if I tell you, oh hey, somebody just opened the door behind you, before you even turn, you have an expectation, you have a sense that the door will be open. Like you,
Yeah.
because you believe me, right, is sort of how we'd put it. But if I tell you like, um oh man, your hair's on fire, you'd just be like, no, there's no way it's on fire, right? You're like, I don't know why you said that, I don't know what you meant, but there's no way my hair has caught on fire as I'm just like sitting here on this call, right? You're like, that just,
Mhm.
it doesn't become part of your sense of things. I mean, you maybe imagine it briefly, but it kind of, it dissipates, it doesn't stick.
Yeah. Yes. So then okay, it feels like the way you're using the word believe is like uh the word believe would mean assigning truth to some statement. So like some
Yeah,
proposition.
and I just sort of, I'm like, nah, I don't think that's a thing. I think that's a
Yeah.
fake thing that people say that they do, and I think it sort of vaguely maps onto some actual things that people actually do, but I don't think it's like a thing one. It's a meaningless token.
Yeah.
Like yeah,
We're on the same
sort
page.
of
Yeah.
dissolves into other stuff.
Yeah. Like
Yeah, so maybe this
I
goes into some of the active inference stuff though.
yeah, it does. It does. And I'm sort of speaking from that because like the way I'd use belief would be more aligned with the sense of things. Right.
Hmm.
Um, if if you tell me, hey, someone's opening the door behind you, um, you know, I wouldn't be like, this statement is, I judge this statement to be true, therefore, like there is literally someone
Yeah.
behind me. But it's like, uh, you know, by getting the observation, Malcolm telling me about someone behind me, I'm like, okay, now now it's more probable that someone's behind me, right? Like my my belief would be like a probability distribution and or a probability estimate for a given world, and it would be updated by your statement, but there's no sense in which your statement is like taken to be true or false. I mean that's like a yeah, I think formal systems composed of concepts, blah blah blah, is like a layer you put on top and is like optional
Right.
to
And
function.
and even I think for the most part in that layer, it's like, okay, what's going on? Do I believe that 2 plus 3 is 5? I don't know. It feels like that's what 2 and 3 and 5 are, or something. Okay, set that aside. Do I believe that water is made out of hydrogen and oxygen?
Mm,
What does that mean? What are hydrogen and oxygen? Like,
yeah.
like, like I certainly believe that if you look up what's water made of, you will get that answer. That is like a sense I have of things. I sure have a sense that people say that. Um, I definitely also it definitely, it accords with my experience that water certainly feels simple. I can I can take in things I know, like, I studied a fair bit of chemistry. I can sort of take in things I know about, like, okay, water kind of unusually gets larger when you freeze it, and this is something to do with the bonds and the hydrogen. Okay, but like, I don't know. It doesn't really. That's like barely part of my sense of things. Like, it's definitely part of my sense of things that it gets bigger when you freeze it. Um, and it's part of my sense of things, sort of, that most things don't do that. But like, when I say most things, I don't know. Lots of things have water in them, and therefore they do that. What does it mean to have water in you? This has water in it differently from how I am 70% water, whatever that means. Right. And so
Mhm.
there's like I have these statements, and then I have my sense of things. And sometimes the statements like deeply inform my sense of things. I feel like I got slightly away from what I was trying to say about what you were getting at. There was something propositional beliefs. Oh yeah, informal system. I guess what I'm saying, yeah, is it's not just, I don't know. Like, yeah, keep going. You say your thing.
Yeah. So the thing that you just said brought something up for me. So it's like uh these formal, okay, you don't have the sense of that water is hydrogen and oxygen, but you could have, right? Like if you were really interested in doing all the experiments and like
Yeah, yeah.
convincing
If I'd
yourself.
done like hydrolysis and I'd done whatever else,
Exactly.
like, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. You do a hydrolysis, and then you're like, oh, okay, this turned into a gas, but could it have turned into gas in other ways? And you like enumerate the other ways it could have turned into gas, and you test them, and you
yeah,
convince yourself that yes, okay, there's only one explanation, and that it's water is actually composed of two things, and these two things, uh, could be called hydrogen and oxygen, just as they could be called whatever, but they're consistent uh, with they have properties that are consistent with things that other people call hydrogen and oxygen. Uh,
right.
so yeah, the point is just you could convince
Oh,
yourself.
okay, okay. I can, if I think about my sense, which again is still barely there, that like, okay, I need oxygen to breathe. And wait, no, no, no. Fish get oxygen out of the water, but they don't get it out of the water molecules. They get oxygen that's dissolved in the water, right?
I think so.
That's a different thing. Okay, never mind. Right. So I was attempting to reason about, the water must be made of oxygen because the fish get, and then like, wait a minute, they're not doing like fission, or it's not fission, but they're not cleaning all
Hydrolysis.
the water. I don't think, like, so anyway, so right. So it's like, when other people tell me stuff, it forms part of my sense of things, but usually in this very kind of loose, haphazard, kind of gestalty way. But then I have beliefs that are sort of more precise than that, but they're
Yeah.
but they're not actually part of my something. This is helping me flesh out what I think about this quite a bit. So I'm really appreciating that.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah.
So one tidbit you might like I sort of see the we definitely have like a formal system architecture of like concepts and how they relate, right? Like the way people talk about science is consistent, right? You have the periodic table and they have properties and like there's implications and whatnot. And it's like
Sure.
you don't have direct experience of all this, but this knowledge still exists.
Yeah.
And it's like these are sort of like shortcuts, like waypoints to help you
Mhm.
orient. Uh, and it's
Totally.
like,
And it's like, so it's like I can have, I guess, a sense of the formal system, and I can like
yeah.
reason from that. That's an odd way of putting it, but that does feel right. Like I have a sense of a structure, and it's like it's different than uh my sense that I can pick things up, which is much more kind of in in the 3/4 dimensional world, like it's kind of there. And then like I have these senses of structures that are a little bit like a sense of a video game. It's sort of like, oh yeah, if I play this game,
Yeah.
um,
But then, this tells you stuff that you have like a translator module, right? Like you technically, something you sort of know you can do, but you've never done. Like, you can build a laser, right? And you know that to build a laser, you like, fuck, I don't know how to build a
I need
laser.
some crystal and I need some energy source and I need some like excitation of something with something. I might be thinking of
Yes.
the
So
instructions for a
you
lightsaber,
know
actually, not a laser.
these words, and you sort of know this recipe, but like the moment you try to actually build the laser, there's going to be a bunch of like tacit knowledge that isn't really encoded in the formal conceptual system. Like, even if you follow like a recipe that's really well laid out, like there's still going to be stuff that's not there. And I guess what I'm saying is like
Yeah.
it, it's like a mini map of the stuff that you can do in the world. And if you know facts about the mini map, it's not the same thing as knowing the reference uh, that exists. But it's like it's still useful to chart your way and like
Right.
get to the things
Yeah.
that the words refer to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's like yeah, the word translation is a neat one there. Like I had a fun experience last summer. I was hanging out with my dad and I wanted him to show me how to bake this particular kind of brown bread that my grandmother used to make a lot, his mom. Um,
Mhm.
and she died, 15 years ago or something. Um, and he got the recipe for this brown bread from her. And the recipe was a tiny little note card that just had, this much flour, this much whatever, bake it, whatever. Like that was like all that was on it. And implicit in that recipe was a bunch of other steps about how you have to leave it out overnight so that it rises, and then you have to like let it rise again in the different thing, and then you got to like grease the pans with whatever, and you got like there's like a bunch of other steps. And so my dad went and turned this tiny note card recipe into like a this big note card recipe. And then he showed with sort of more of those steps inserted for somebody who, didn't bake bread multiple times a week already and sort of already knew the gist of baking bread and just needed the ingredients. So then he showed me how to make it and then showed me his thing. And I went and wrote out what I might have needed in order to make it correctly the first time, knowing nothing, right? Because he kind of iterated on her recipe a few times. And so by the time he was writing down a more verbose instruction set, he also had a bunch of tacit knowledge. But I watched him and like I was like, okay, assume I knew only what I knew before I watched you make this bread. What would I need to see? And it included a bunch of stuff that you'd assume like that once you've done it literally once, you might remember. But if you hadn't done it literally once, you might sort of just skip that step or miss that step or assume that you were going to end up needing to do that later, but oh, you needed to do it then. Oops. Like, and so this is part of that unpacking of the map and turning it into something that um for lack of a better word compiles. It's like it
Yeah.
it could be incorporated into my sense of things if it was sort of sufficiently dense and accommodating of what I did and did not know.
Yeah, that sounds right. Cool. So you were saying you didn't believe in beliefs in the context of like the church.
I mean, in any context, but yeah, in the context of the
Yeah.
church as well. Um, I mean, I want to hear more about the active inference stuff, though. Actually, I feel like I feel like that dovetails well with this, and I mean, there's more that can be said about the church stuff, but yeah, I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, we can talk about active inference. Uh, I mean, uh, do you have like things that you've been thinking about or like encountering and like or like some confusion? Maybe like I noticed Tyler was confused about something.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I'll say a few things. Like, I got really into perceptual control theory like 7 years ago, which is of course, like the predictive processing type model, sort of isomorphic to it. Like it has a very similar shape with the same kind of perceptual hierarchy and control hierarchy or whatever. Um, but I found PCT more intuitive because it feels like well, first of all, it's framed in language that makes a lot more sense. It's like, what am I controlling for? What do I want? What do
Yeah.
and what I want and what I expect may be very different. And if they are, I am quite upset, right? Like, and so it feels intuitive to have different words for those. But somehow the active inference stuff says, nah, expectations and wants are just the same thing. And I'm like, the fuck? That's bullshit. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. So if you can answer that, I'm curious. That's like one one way in.
Sure, yeah, yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to give like a like fully satisfactory answer that satisfies all the counterexamples that one could come up with. Um,
Sure, but even some clues, we can kind of iterate on it.
yeah. So why is expectation the same thing as like intention, right? Or like preference?
Hmm.
Um, uh, let me let me just think for a second, like a way
Yeah, yeah.
to like linearize this. Yeah, yeah, okay. Um, so I think the first thing that's worth saying is like this is a trick, okay? Like making your intentions be expectations of the model feels like a trick.
Hmm.
In the sense that it feels like a trick to use a simpler like framework, right? It's like we have this framework of like Bayesian inference that's really good at describing the process of building up a model like and updating it with new data
Hmm.
and like we wish we could use it with actions and now we're gonna like make them fit into Bayesian inference. The fact is that organisms do seem to be acting in a way that corresponds to. So it's not lossy, is what I'm saying. It's like it feels like a trick conceptually because we had the Bayesian inference framework
Mm.
first, and then we conceptually adapted it to fit like the action stuff with the expectations, and so we had the expectations language before, right?
Hmm.
And then sorry, I think I could be being clearer like if I spoke more slowly. Um, you start with Bayesian inference. Do you have a sense do you have a sense of how it works? I can give a like really short like
Yeah, I
concise.
mean, I'm familiar with Bayes' theorem and the idea of priors and posteriors and updating based on evidence.
Yeah,
I don't know that much about how it is used in this like hierarchical network sense. Like there must be some sort of top-down, bottom-up thing going
yeah,
on.
yeah. And I don't know very much about the hierarchical setup either. I think the errors propagate bottom up and like the prediction errors of lower layers become inputs to the upper layers, and then the top layers somehow condition the lower layers with yeah. I don't know how they condition them. This is just something I read, but let's just take Bayesian inference. So yeah, you have priors, you have um the rest of your model, which people call like likelihood, which is like the conditional relationships between variables. And you can make but when you combine the likelihood and the prior, you can make a prediction, right? About um, you know you have a prior that it's sunny, right? And you have a likelihood that if it's sunny, people will be at the beach. It's likely that people will be at the beach. So and you want to know the probability of people being at the beach while only knowing that it's sunny, right? So you,
Hmm.
you do like base rule, uh, and you get the probability of people being at the beach given that it's sunny.
Hmm.
Um,
And what you're saying is this is all happening on the level of your sense of things. It's not like you're like reasoning through
Yeah,
like this
you
explicitly. You're
couldn't
just
be,
like,
right?
oh, a sunny day, and you like imagine the beach being full of people. Like it's sort of just like that's
Yeah. And your cells are doing the same thing at their
mm,
level.
hmm
Uh, yeah, and your muscles and so on. So um, so yeah, this is basically an inference, and like you make a prediction, and imagine, you saw in the weather forecast it was cloudy, right? So you aren't expecting people to be at the beach because it's cloudy, but you've been inside all day, and your friend sends you a text. You got a text from your friend, and he's at the beach, and you're like, oh, the weather forecast must have been wrong, right? So like
hmm
you do data and you update, and
hmm
now you think it's sunny because even though you saw the weather forecast, your friend seems to be at the beach, and that like
hmm
seems more likely, makes it more likely that it's sunny. Okay, so you make a prediction, you get new data, you update. How does action figure into this? Okay, action figures into this because your model, the priors in your model include information about you, like as well, right? Your model isn't just of the world,
Mm.
external world. Your model includes Malcolm, right? And
Okay.
what Malcolm would
Yeah.
do, right? And and so when uh you get some observation, like someone's getting really up in your face, right? What would Malcolm do? Well, Malcolm would politely tell them to like, please,
hmm
please, please stay back. Um, and that's just a prediction about what's going to happen next, right? It's like uh, observation. Someone's like bothering me. Like prediction. Someone's bothering Malcolm. Prediction. Malcolm will like ask them not to bother them.
hmm
Uh, yeah, and like that's basically it. It's like your model comes baked in with like evolutionary imperatives, basically,
Mm.
like staying
So
alive. Right.
yeah. So one thing I like about this is that it feels like it does a cool non-dual thing,
Yeah.
like where it's like I'm I'm part of the world. I'm part of the world I'm predicting. Um, and I guess the what the model says is basically like when I have a strong enough prediction about what I'm going to do, then I do it. But if I have a weak prediction, or if I have like a conflicted or confused or like unclear prediction of what I'm going to do, then I don't do it.
Yeah. That's a good question. Like whether so when there's a discrepancy between your prediction and the data that you get, um, two things can happen, right? You can either update your models to
hmm
resolve the discrepancy, right? So next time you'll predict something that's closer to the data you just saw. Uh, so like someone bothers you and you like conform to it. You're like, oh, okay, it seems someone's bothering me, and like
I'm
I'm just
sorry.
being bothered. Yeah. So like you change your mind, and you're like, okay, I guess before I thought I wasn't being bothered and I wasn't the kind of person who's being bothered, but now I am. So you change your mind. And the other thing you can do is like you can act on it and like ask the person to stop. Um, and and whether one or the other happens just um, is a function of how strongly you're holding that belief, that
Mm.
expectation, right? So like stuff that's existential, like I am this room, sorry, I am not in a room that's on fire, right? Like if somehow your room starts burning, you have a pretty strong belief that you're not about to die in a fire, so you get the fuck out. But if it's like uh I don't know, like if it's something like just mildly annoying, or something that's like barely barely worth acting on, like, oh, my room's a little messy and I don't feel like cleaning it up yet. Like you just take it, right? Like you're just like,
Mm-hmm.
okay,
hmm
I'm not the you know, it it doesn't bother you enough to act on it. So it's like, oh, okay, so maybe I would be like the kind of person that has a room that's a little bit messy. But if it becomes messier, then it'll infringe on your self-image.
Mm,
You know,
mhm,
and you're
mhm,
like, no, no, I'm not the kind of person that's got a, you know, a super messy room. So obviously I've got to clean up now.
mm, mhm, hmm. There's still something I don't like about it, but I don't know if that's a disagreement or so much as like a, or what am I trying to get at? I don't know that that's so much I think it's incorrect as it is like a chafing against the aesthetic of it. Like there's, I don't know, desires feel sacred and attempts to sort of like shove them into some bin where there's no such thing as free will feel inhumane. Um, and I don't know that that's exactly what's happening here. I mean, I think it's something slightly different, but I do feel like there's something weird and indirect about it. There's something kind of I don't know. Like when I imagine somebody living by this philosophy, I or when I imagine me living by this philosophy, for instance, it and I say philosophy because what I mean is something like the way that language and meaning are constructing the kinds of things that we're talking about, which is different from something like if I imagine somebody who like has the same sense of things that we're talking about here. They have a sense of how the top down, bottom up thing works, blah, 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 blah. They have a sense of how, oh yeah, I have a model myself, blah, blah, blah. Like they have that sense of things, but they're not talking about it this way. They're talking about it in yet some other way that I don't, maybe nobody has named yet. I don't per se imagine that that sense of things causes issues, but when I attend to the philosophy, which is to say the way we are making meaning about it, I find myself going, huh, I don't like it. It feels bad. It feels inhumane. It feels uh boring
Wait, can I
or something.
clarify? Do you not like, do you not like the language of it, or do you not like something deeper that you might have meant by the philosophy of it?
It's kind of the language, but it's sort of like I feel like it's almost like the negative, not the negative space, the implied worldview of the language
Mhm.
as I perceive it.
Yeah, do you wanna try to describe the implied, like the perception you have of the implied
Yeah.
worldview?
It's something like it feels dissociative. Um, like rather than having desires, like I'm running everything through a simulation. Um, like I remember having an insight. It feels like it's somehow no, that's not it either. I don't know. It feels empty. It feels dead.
Yeah. How
It
do you
feels
usually how do you
yeah.
usually respond to like insight meditation type, you know, worldviews? Like emptiness and
Yeah,
dependent.
yeah. Um so I mean I've had a few relationships to them, one of which is similar to the concern critique that I'm having now. And I think that part of that is because I think that they use language in ways that are bad. Like I don't think that that's like I think I have a real critique that is important, which is separate from whether the insights are true, if you see what I mean. Like I'm like, I don't know, many people have had these insights, probably the insights are true. But
The language.
but the language and the worldview implied by the language.
Yeah,
If you
and
use the
the
phrase
worldview
suffering is
embodies.
caused by, if you use the phrase suffering is caused by desire, that will do something to you, that is different than the phrase dukkha is caused by tanha. If you don't speak Sanskrit, like they will do different things to you, those two different phrases. And people's willingness to use phrases like suffering is caused by desire, as opposed to suffering is caused by grasping on this micro scale level. Like, if you're willing to use the phrase suffering is caused by desire, you are willing to have people self-abnegate their desires. Whether you mean it as a psyop, or whether you're just being sloppy, or whether you've abnegated your own desires and you now need to sort of rationalize and justify that, whatever's going on there, like, I want nothing to do with it. But I'm like interested in, like, oh, what's this Tanha Graspy whatever thing? Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Like, I'm interested in that. And so I guess, like, I'm sure that there are people out there who are using the active inference stuff in ways that don't feel, the word that keeps coming to mind for me is clephotic. Um, which is
what's that?
it's a fucking Kabbalah word. It's a very obscure jargon of like hermetic magic or something like that. But it's um but it um but the thing I mean is something, how would I describe it without using that word? Um there's a thing called capgras delusion, which is when you become convinced that your loved ones have been replaced by imposters. And largely where this delusion how this delusion happens is that somehow the what's it called, the fusiform gyrus, the facial recognition system, gets unhooked from the like amygdala or the some other like emotion center of the brain. And so
Mhm.
because that link has been severed, when you see your mom or your wife or whatever, you don't feel love. So you're like, I recognize that as my mom, but I don't feel the way I should feel towards my mom. Therefore,
Yeah.
hypothesis, she must be an imposter, which is, it's impressive the extent to which people will rationalize a bunch of very improbable shit in order to explain these like really strong whatevers, which I think is a testament to some of the theories that we're pointing at here. The fact that, like, you know, people will have a new sense of things that involves this sort of weird whatever. But um uh and amusingly, just as a tiny aside, sometimes if it's only the fusiform gyrus that has been disconnected, the person can talk on the phone with their mom and they're like, yeah, this is my mom, right? Because it's only the facial recognition thing that's like borked. Anyway, super trippy. I have a bunch of thoughts on capgras delusion and my whole non-naive trust dance framework, and a bunch of other things that I could kind of say about that. Which at a high level is basically about, like, part of the problem is when you reify what is and is not, as opposed to being more in tune with what I can and cannot trust, something like that. Um, like if the person, instead of saying that's not my mom, said I can't trust that that's my mom. It's like there's a way I would feel if I just like trusted that that was my mom, and I don't feel that. I feel empty. I feel hollow. I feel empty or something. Anyway, I brought this up as a sort of like analogy somehow for how I feel when I look at these theories. It's like they feel like they're like they look like my mom, but they're not my mom. They somehow like are failing to feel alive. They're failing to feel resonant with me. They don't say hi. They say hello, robot. And I'm like,
That's true.
no, I'm not a robot. Fuck off. That's like my response. It's like they don't say hi to me. That's the
Yeah,
feeling I
yeah,
get
yeah.
from these theories, including a bunch of the sort of the Theravadan shit.
Yeah, so you feel like yeah, again, the translation isn't like being properly made to like the way you understand the world, and like the terms
Mm-hmm.
that are familiar to you, like concepts that you like to use and so on.
It's not just that though. It's like it's not like like to take a more boring literal example of translation, right? Like if you were trying to explain this stuff in Portuguese, like I would just sort of be like, I'm not really following, right? And you know, if you tried to explain it in ways that were simply very obscure, right, like very difficult to follow, that might just be difficult. I'd be like, ah, this feels overly technical or something. But
Yeah,
instead,
but you understand, but you still feel some dissonance.
yeah, it feels like I'm like, I don't deny the shape, but I do not want to talk about it like this.
Yeah, yeah, okay,
That's
perfect. I
kind of
think I
what's showing up.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, I think it seems like you're taking issue with the language of it because because by using this language in especially around people who don't already have the framework in their heads,
Hmm.
the words have associations that lead to assumptions that you think are like probably not bad, right?
Hmm.
Because it's like I'm gonna be saying something about how desires are expectations, and somebody might take that as, oh, it's like not worth it to have desires because I'm
For
making something
instance,
up.
yeah, I mean, that one's more clear with the like desire is the cause of suffering thing or something. But like, I think it's not just like it's partially I'm worried about the impact it'll have on people who don't already get the model. But there's another level on which it causes me to distrust the model. I'm like, I think it's missing something. If it's willing to talk like this, I think it's missing something.
Mm.
And it's sort of like, have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and they say, I don't have a good example, but they're like, they make some sort of claim or something, and you're like, whoa, hold up, like that doesn't fit with this, like, and they go, oh yeah, no, I totally care about this, yeah, no, but I was saying this thing, and I'm like, and you're like, look, if you cared about this the way I care about this, you would not have said it that way,
Mm.
like, and so it sort of feels like that. So I'm like, I feel like there's something I care about that's sort of in the shadow of this way of seeing. Um,
Yeah, okay, that's a good way to put it.
and so it's like, okay, yeah, there's something structural that it's doing that's cool that I want to integrate that. And you know, I might at some point myself try to do the work of embodying that whole worldview, even if it contains a shadow, and then kind of going, okay, and I've got that view and I've got my other views, and how do I get some depth perception on that, right? You know,
Mm.
but you know, um, but so like I might yet do that work myself just because I want it, like I have the sense that there's good stuff in you know Friston's work and in the free energy stuff and the active inference and so forth, um but it does rub me the wrong way, so that's kind of what I like it feels like it feels like listening to somebody who's racist in order to understand some
Yeah.
subtle point that they understand about power dynamics, but like I have to
Uh-huh.
do work to get the racism out of the thing. It feels like that.
That's hilarious.
Like there's a
That's
subtle misanthropy in it. It's not, you know,
huh.
anti a particular race, but it feels anti-human somehow. And I'm like, and like, yeah.
I wonder, yeah, I'm trying to pattern match it. I'm trying to like take your perspective and be like,
Yeah.
okay, what kinds of dissonance do I sense that Malcolm could also be sensing?
Mm,
Yeah, like what sort of dissonance do I sense and ignore, or sense and I'm okay with, or sense and
right,
have an
right.
expectation for that Malcolm uh
Yeah.
yeah might take issue with.
Cool. I appreciate that move.
So you said something about desires feeling important. I feel like to actually make this translation, I need a little more information. Like, do you have a sense of what like values it feels like it steps on? Like, without talking about problems of the theory, like talk about like stuff that you feel sort of gets shoved in you.
Yeah, I feel like one of the most like beautiful shifts that I sometimes make in my awareness or my mindset, my stance towards the world is a shift into seeing things more in first person or something, being really in touch with what I want, what matters to me, what uh uh and also kind of like what the world looks like from my perspective. And I don't see an inherent reason, especially when I orient to the question what the world looks like from my perspective. I don't see a reason why that part would be missing from the active inference model. But somehow when I engage with like the idea of that instead of desires, I just have expectations about it's not even about what I want. It's just like it's just expectations of what I will do. Like that feels like how I relate to other people when I don't like them.
Yeah,
Like
I
when I
think
like them, I have a sense of what they want. I have a sense of their desire and how it flows from them. When I don't like them, I'm just like, oh, let me predict them. They're a fucking black box.
okay, okay, okay. I think I got enough information now. Like this felt this made it sound like I was telling you to stop talking, but that wasn't what I meant. I just meant that, I
Well,
feel
I mean,
I
I feel kind of complete. If you got a response, then go for it.
yeah. Um okay. So correct me if I'm wrong. So I'm gonna make a hypothesis. So like um you feel like this framework would privilege thinking about yourself, sorry, privilege thinking about um your expectations as desires rather than the opposite. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. I just want to mention another thing. So because we're like assembling a formal system, like we need to use words in senses that are like, the word surprise means a very specific thing, for example, right? And the word belief and like the word expectation means a very specific thing.
Mhm.
Um, because we're defining stuff in mathematical terms. So like some of the typical like popular uses, meanings of words are gonna just be uh, given up on under the framework. Anyway, um, it feel okay. If I'm Malcolm, it feels like, oh, okay, so my desires are expectations. So it means it's does it mean that I shouldn't, cultivate what I perceive as desires and like tap into what I perceive as desires, and that, I should just look at my own model of what I expect about myself and just do that, be like, oh, my model says that Malcolm has gotten up late every day, so like Malcolm's gonna keep waking up late, and like, should I just take that to be my desire? To which I, like Francisco, would answer, no, right? Like the expectation that you have of yourself, like as waking up late tomorrow because you've been waking up late, is like a counterfactual model of Malcolm, or like just a secondary, more abstract model of Malcolm that you have like more intellectually, and like the
Hmm.
um, the um, the desire that you feel is the expectation of like an inner model of Malcolm that you don't have access to, like you don't have conscious access to, right? It's like the machine of your body like embodies a generative model, like a Bayesian inference model, uh, whose expectation is that Malcolm wants to be a person who's really effective, and a person who's really effective will start waking up early as soon as they feel capable of doing that. So that's what Malcolm will do, right? It's like maybe there's a confusion between, an intellectual model of yourself that will have expectations versus the like implicit model which you are and therefore don't have like complete cognitive access to. I
The
spoke for a
model,
long time.
the model that I am. No, this is good. This is good. The model that I am. That feels more intuitive. Or like makes more sense. Um, I feel myself more in that than when I'm like the model that I am, as opposed
Hmm.
to the model that I have.
Yeah, because you do have like a smaller model of Malcolm that you like consciously build up, and that's not the same thing as the model which you are, which you're making subconscious predictions about the world, and you're also making subconscious predictions about yourself, which you feel as desires.
Yeah, okay, hang on. That's sort of helpful. Let me recompile. Uh, uh, okay, so to get like weird and maybe slightly metaphysical, um, which is where my mind has gone apparently. I One of the most potent things I perceived, like one of the clearest, most powerful somethings I perceived, feels to me like well, so a friend of mine literally thinks that this perception that I had was somehow isomorphic to stream entry. That's a whole sort of a whole other conversation, but I name it because it's well, it's relevant, right? I mean, we've been talking about insight and shit like that. Um, but the way I was inclined to articulate this perspective is very different than how people usually articulate stream entry, which is part of why I am in favor of more people doing weird shit on their own and not just like following paths where when they have some insight they'll just assume it's the same old insight everybody else has had, as opposed to having the uh let's say the one true meta insight and calling it, oh yeah, it's this insight everybody's already had. It's like, no, it's the one true meta insight that has infinite forms. Anyway, um, okay, cool. Sounds like that makes some amount of sense. So in this insight, one of the things I realized was something like everything that everything does makes sense from its own perspective. And that's like that's certainly like on the scale of like people, okay, everything they do makes sense from their own perspective. But also when a person is conflicted, part of them wants one thing and part of them wants another thing, whether or not you call those parts, there are multiple perspectives at work that are kind of clashing and are not able to make sense together, but are somehow, in conflict, and in particular they're both putting some sort of creative pressure on the same system, which is causing this kind of conflicted state or whatever. And when I said stream entry earlier, I actually meant first path. But anyway, that's mostly an aside. The thing I'm trying to get at here is like I feel like I've had a perception that highlights something about the way in which it's sort of all unfolding at all of the scales, and like it doesn't really make sense to like describe this as like trusting me. That's sort of like a not particularly useful level of abstraction. Um, but it does make sense to refer to me as trusting it. And there is a kind of trust dance that we can do together where I can sort of trust it more. Like I recently had one of these jars that leaked all over my bag, and it's currently over in the corner waiting to be tested for whether it was the lid that was leaky, the jar that was leaky, or both.
Mhm.
And so it's like, okay, I trust that one a little bit less, but like maybe it can earn my trust back, right? And I can sort of personify it a little bit. The personification is not per se the point, but it's something about how on every scale systems are like negotiating and yeah. Uh,
Yeah, I know.
and so it's something like I forget what you said that kind of led me into this reflection, but there's something about yeah, you were talking about me having like my sense of myself in first person where I have desires. And I guess yeah, I just got thinking about the sense that I've had of there being something like fractal perspectives that are like these like sub perspectives and sub perspectives. And this sort of obviously kind of comes out of the hierarchical model that perceptual control theory and predictive processing both share. Like there's a kind of fractal perceptual thing. Um, and but then like the way that my cells do homeostasis is not actually part of that fractal. It's like part of a different like it's sort of it's very connected to that fractal, but it's like within the cell, it's not taking orders from on high for the most part. Like on high is sort of tuning a few parameters and stuff, but it's not sort of directing how the cell does like getting rid of waste products or something like that. Probably.
Yeah, yeah, but maybe like not the top level. Maybe the top level is not directing the cell, but there's like a causal chain, and there's a level directly above the cell, which is like, maybe the organ or maybe the organ is like changing the concentration of some chemicals, and like the cell has to respond to that
Totally.
concentration
Yeah,
change.
like it's all tuning all the way up and all the way down.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
and it seems to me like this is related to the free energy minimization thing.
Oh, sorry. Just give me
Yeah.
a second, because. Olha, eu tô numa chamada.
So this feels very related to the whole free energy minimization thing
Mhm.
somehow in a way I can't quite describe. But I guess maybe one way to put it is I feel like I've found a principle of how the cosmos unfolds
Mhm.
that applies on every scale.
Mhm.
And the free energy principle seems to be also how the
A
cosmos unfolds
principle,
on every
yeah, on
scale.
every
And
scale, yeah.
therefore, they must either be like compatible or literally the same.
Hmm.
Um, and I feel like where I've come from in all of this is I have been inclined to describe that principle as best I can in first person rather than describing it in third person.
Mm.
Like systems act so as to minimize their whatever. Like, no. What does that feel like? I like when things make sense.
Yeah.
Things
Yeah,
make
you can,
sense.
I mean,
Things make
you
as
can do
much
both.
sense to me as they do. And then I want what I want and I feel what I feel and I do what makes sense to me.
Hmm.
Like there's a way in which that is the articulate like that's an articulation of the free energy principle,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Like, I mean, I guess it's
I
like
mean,
it's.
we can make it more precise, but I think it's possible to make it more precise while keeping it in first person.
Mm.
And that's what I'm really interested in.
Mm. Yeah, I wonder how that could look like. Like, can you describe a system from within that system? You know what I'm saying? Because like your first person perspective emerges from like this thing that is bigger, which is the like system you're embedded in, right? Um, so like, yeah, like how far can you go with the first person description is sort of what I'm wondering.
Well, I mean, the funny part in a way is that like you can actually take the I pronoun and put it anywhere, right? Like, I am this cup again who has summoned Malcolm to pick me up, and Malcolm's holding me and kind of waving me around, and I'm getting him to talk about me, and um I'm made of glass. I don't have thoughts per se, but I can be a character in this scene who is puppeting Malcolm to talk about me. Um, and that's like, a little bit of a stretch, but it's like there's a way in which the no self insight is kind of like about the reality that like, this is more weird than speaking I as like this organism.
Hmm.
Um, and and often what people use the I pronoun for actually shifts around a bunch in themselves. They'll say, "Oh, I don't trust my feelings." Okay, so I is some thought, and then my feelings are some external thing like my mug or whatever. Like, um, anyway, so I mean, one way to do it would just be to literally like take all of the active inference sentences that you have written, or take some sentences and just literally replace a phrase like the system or whatever with the
I
pronoun I and just sort of like see how it goes. Like that's like one approach. Um, but we might notice as we start doing that that different language wants to arise,
mm.
like desire as distinct from expectation, for instance. Um, I don't know, but like that's an example of like a thing that might like
Mm. Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking now is
because of the way that self-reference like when I'm expecting this to fall when I drop it, it's
yeah.
like there's not a recursive structure in that expectation. You'll see what I mean in a moment. Versus when I'm expecting my hand to open and close, there's an extra recursive loop in that expectation, I think. And that's part of how we even come to have a sense of self at all, is that we understand the boundaries of the things that something like we can simply choose versus the things that are sort of outside of our grasp. And then, if I take an object and decide that that object is now a tool that I'm going to use, like the Heideggerian hammer, it's like now I am hitting my finger. It's not the box is hitting my finger. I am hitting my finger with the box, right? But the box has become part of me temporarily because
Hmm.
it's like my agency boundary loops through it. Um, and yeah, I don't know. It feels to me like in first person, like that makes more sense than just like that's part of like to say, oh no no no, I'm not hitting the my finger. The box is hitting my finger, and I'm telling the box to hit my finger. That feels like similarly like stupidly indirect in the way that saying, well, it's not that I desire, it's that I expect that me will. It feels like it's adding a layer of indirectness, which is maybe helpful for like some modeling and being like, hey, are these technically? Yeah, they can be technically the same thing. Cool.
Yeah,
But then when I
that's
want
what
to
it's
go,
for.
okay, but then like when I want to go back to thinking about it, I want to like collapse that recursion again. I guess is sort of like what's I want to like allow that I want to allow the thing to simplify where possible. I think maybe I don't. Maybe there's like a need to actually untangle it greatly, and that's what the fucking insight meditators are on about in the first place.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure I fully see what you're like idealizing with like making the move towards like a first person perspective shift. Um, I think I think from understanding like the math and the conceptual like apparatus of active inference, that there is still some work that people need to do to like apply it or to
Hmm.
like usefully like leverage this knowledge in like, okay, so how do I live my life differently as a result?
Hmm.
and,
Yeah.
and that might involve like express like saying a bunch of like first person perspective things, including how do these concepts map to my phenomenology, right? Like why does why do desires and expectations feel like different things even though they're supposed to be the same, right?
Well, but like that feels to me to be like e-
Okay,
well,
okay, yeah, let me phrase it
even
let
though
me
who is supposing them to be the same? Carl Friston.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Carl Friston
Some
is supposing them to be the same, and sometimes I like what he says. Okay. And then, but they feel different to me. Okay. So how do I reconcile that? And like the idea of supposed to be the same, like, no, bro, like if the math doesn't feel right, yeah, then you're
it's
missing
just
something.
a
The
map.
math is missing something.
It's just a lens, right? Like, and we have this portfolio of lenses, right? We have Buddhist lens, we have free energy lens, we
We have a
have
Christian lens.
yeah, and so it's like when I put on this lens, I'm like, okay, these are the premises that I accept as true for
Mm.
now, like
Right.
temporarily,
And then within that,
incrementally.
I have this conflict between, okay, desire and expectation are the same in this model, and yet they feel different or something like that.
Yeah, and it's like, can I, if I find the way to, if I find a way to like satisfactorily square this, can I get value out of the predictions that this model makes? Like, can I get value from sometimes thinking about my desires as expectations, right? Because it's like, so one way that this applies, right? Like one thing that you can really talk about that you couldn't otherwise. Um, if you wanna if you wanna bring something about, or if you wanna get someone to do something, uh, you can like work on their self-image, right? Because their self-image um includes, you know, like their
Or like
self-image.
implies what they're going to do.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, right? So like that, and this is coherent with why making people more confident actually makes them more effective. Why why like even like role playing makes certain behaviors like come out better. Uh, and there's a link to like chaos magic or whatever, where the goal is to where the goal is to like shift people's beliefs, or like write to people's beliefs, and one way to write to people's beliefs is by like um mm, yeah, okay, I was gonna say it's by making them desire stuff, but I think that's like kind of not a great fit. uh, just what I mean is that you start observing this channel between desires and beliefs, that you wouldn't suppose was there if you didn't have this description. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, it turns out actually I can influence my desires by influencing my beliefs, and vice versa.
Mhm. Right.
It's like if the way ads work, like this kind of man buys a really expensive watch. Aren't you this kind of man who gets a lot of women and is rich and stylish? Yes, I am this kind of man who is rich and stylish.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like I find this stuff like pretty dangerous. Like, and it's not clear that I want to think more like that. If you see what I
Yeah,
mean. I mean, I do want to recognize the extent to which I already think like that, which is part of what you're kind of highlighting, but it like this is related to what I was describing as feeling misanthropic about the thing. It's like turning people, like it turns people into influence machines or something, like belief machines, expectation machines. The last one feels sort of most apt, and I'm sort of like, I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't want to
it's
live
like,
like that.
yeah, I feel you. And it's like you don't need to adopt this facet of the lens like often. Like you can adopt it as often as you want. I'm just saying that it's there, and like apart, in addition to recognizing the extent to which you already think like this, uh, there's also like a security mindset type thing, where it's
Mhm.
like, you want to be able to defend against
Yeah, yeah.
attacks that use this vector, right?
Right. Well, and I mean, currently I feel like I have some like psychic defenses that are present in relation to the entire active inference free energy principle model as it's being presented. I'm like, no, no. If I install that, that will have security flaws. Like that's my current sense, or like it will
Yeah.
somehow like compress my experience.
Are
Um,
you afraid that it'll like replace other lenses that you already have?
uh, Yeah, I mean, somewhat. Not in so many words, but yeah, like I think there's something like that. That's my usual model for why people are defensive about literally anything for what it's worth. I'm like maybe more self-aware of it than people sometimes are, including me sometimes. But like I'm, when I describe the sense of like it feels like listening to somebody racist who has like some useful ideas about power or something, and I'm sort of trying to like
Yeah, you're like afraid
get
the
the
racism
right. I'm sort of like like um and uh yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that feels like kind of um part of what I'm grappling with is like, okay, how do I not lose touch with all this other stuff I care about while taking this in? Um and usually my heuristic for that is actually just like shore up the stuff I do care about, like really affirm, like, yes, this and this and this, all these things matter, and kind of have those feel really robust, and then go, okay, now what about this? Like,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
kind of then have more space to kind of take it in and sort of this is secure, so I can sort of go, oh, okay, this, and then I can go, so how does, huh.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so
Like,
that's, I mean, over time, I expect I'll do that. Like the free energy stuff has gotten louder in my scene over the last little while, so I'm like, okay, soon it's time to take that in, and I can sense that there's a bigger like insight slash shift thing that I'm on the way to realizing that like is coming through in a whole bunch of themes, including like there's a team that I'm working with where one of the members and I have been having a bit of tension, and the tension is I don't know that it's quite on the same axis as this, but it's related enough that I sort of expect that the two insights will sort of help with each other. But it's something like I have a very strong principle of like you can't trust what you can't trust. And that's actually a way to articulate the thing that I described as the scale independent principle of how things unfold. It's like
Mhm.
everything trusts what it trusts and not what it doesn't, and unfolds accordingly. Um, and uh and so it's like, okay, I've got that principle. She's got some sort of principle that's like, trust in life's curriculum or something like that. Like it's one of those kind of like surrender to the cosmos type principles. And I'm like, but I don't trust that. So how does and so I'm like, okay, there's an arc for me there that involves like synthesizing those two. And I have the sense that that synthesis will help with me grokking free energy principle, will help with me grokking what my friend Tim is on about faith, and will help with grokking like I don't know, Michael, whoever's the surrender experiment. It's a book. I think it's by a guy named Michael Singer, yeah. um and so I'm like, maybe I'll read that book. Like I sort of have a sense of like, okay, there's this cluster of things that I currently don't get, don't trust, don't like, but like I'm like, there's some wisdom there. I'll get it somehow. And then I will have a worldview that encompasses both, and then I'll be really wise. That's my plan.
Oh yeah, yeah, that sounds great. It feels so good when there's like just like an amorphous hyper object that is like full of juicy stuff, and you just
Yeah.
need to find a way in, and you're like palpating all around. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I feel you. And I really like the way you described like the thing about like reifying the stuff you think is important now, and bringing up the new thing, which you're afraid might corrupt you, as like a way to like explore the parallax safely. I think that's, I don't know, that sounds like a good strategy for like progressing towards a more flexible, like, um y- you know uh sort of sandboxing of worldviews, almost, like you sandbox, like
Hmm.
if you're studying like cybersecurity or whatever, you
Yeah,
like you
yeah.
have that, you sandbox like viruses and stuff. In the same way, you can be like, okay, here are the permissions you have, here are the permissions you don't have. Uh, now let's like step into this worldview, and sort of being able to trust that. That's my description of the ideal sort of meta rational, like multiple
Mm-hmm.
like meta
Yeah,
system that
yeah,
we
and it's
see.
it's of course it's not ever quite that simple or straightforward to just
No, yeah,
block it out or whatever. And ideologies have optimized themselves for being good at like jumping air gaps and stuff. But um, yeah,
yeah, that's a good point to consider. Yeah, I was just idealizing it and sort of giving it like a visual.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I like that. Um, let's kind of like maybe bring it into
Yeah,
wrapping up, and maybe let's like somehow bridge it back to church and religion and uh I don't know, your thoughts on the Holy Trinity in terms of self-organization, or I don't know what we're looking for exactly, but
yeah, like a way to sort of resonate with the beginning of the conversation and like make it
yeah.
nice.
And
Yeah,
both resonate with the beginning of the conversation, and something like one of the things we've been enjoying at the church services is something like uh, situating, let's say, psychotechnology practices that we could do in any context. Someone's just improvisational movement or whatever. But it's like it hits different to situate that practice within a um within
context.
a church, yeah, within a context that's oriented to like what's it all about and like how are we making meaning of it together. And so I don't know, I feel like there's something kind of neat about like if we can um situate it's not like the stuff we've been just saying about the free energy principle isn't itself very much engaged with the what's it all about question, but insofar as we both have an interest in uh yeah, like religion and self-organization on the level of not just like the sort of fundamental principles but the praxis and embodied in
Yeah,
life, it's like, yeah, how do we tie that back into all this?
yeah, I can try saying like riffing a bit.
Yeah,
Okay. Um. So yeah, I've been feeling the need for something like church for some time now. Like I usually refer to it as Dunbar scale coordination. Um, roughly 150 people.
totally.
Yeah. And let's see. I one way I describe one way I describe like a religion is like a grab bag of like psychosocial technologies plus like a narrative or like an
Mhm.
ontology story about the world and so on. And I don't think church and religion need to be like um lumped together necessarily. So I'm not sure why I brought that up.
Hmm.
Let's what would I do at church?
I mean, it seems to
What
me like they have a kind of very basic connection, which is something like
like, meaning making?
meaning making, and also something like a shared sense of how we do things, like a shared sense of how we organize things. Like, you know, like who in your culture or whatever does it feel good to like leave your kids with? It's like, that's, you could divide that along ideological lines that are political, but you could also divide it along lines that are more like, well, what's our basic sense of what a human being is? Like that's, or what goodness is. Like those questions, those, ethical, metaphysical, all of those are like very, central to church and central to like raising kids and so forth.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Okay, so if we think about the function of church for a moment,
Hmm.
uh, right? So one function is, the Dunbar level coordination bit. So people meet regularly at a place. It's like the families come together, and there's some, there's just communication. There's like aggregation of like bottom up information. Everybody's been living their lives, and they're like updating each other and like routing resources. Maybe I can help you, you can help me, blah blah blah. And there's like some top down coordination too. It's like, okay, we've you know there are these maybe conflicts or like coordination problems that could be solved by, us all singing together, or us all making a deal to start like making some commitment that's like
Mhm.
facilitated by the space. And that's one thing, that's like the coordination aspect. uh and then there's also the practicing, like this diffusion of like psychosocial technologies, like where people people learn to, you know uh pray, meditate, do IFS, focusing,
Mhm.
whatever. It's like they learn about more about um handling themselves and like gathering information from their subjective experience, and handling their emotions and so on. And social technologies, in the sense where, you get to practice sort of more sincere communication, or like more sort of energy aware, not mental conversation, but more like, actually sensing the person in ways you might not be used to. um Okay, so these are two functions
Mhm.
of the church. Can you think of other functions of the church?
The two being the like Dunbar scale coordination and
And this like diffusion and practice of like psychosocial technologies,
hmm,
which they like just practices.
yeah,
So the improv would be an example too.
yeah, yeah, improv. I mean, you could sort of I don't know how the different things all kind of divide up. Like you could kind of tag this under coordination, but I think there's something about getting people into, yeah, a shared story, but also a shared principle around like what we want to exalt, like both both as like what we want to exalt sort of as forces in the world, like agape, for instance. It's like, oh, do we want to like um all kind of delight, what does it mean to delight together in the reality that we live in a universe that in which agape is part of our experience? Like, oh wow, like that's cool. um and also, like, what do we want to exalt in terms of individual behavior, which may also be, the implementation and embodiment of agapic love and the like nurturing unfolding love. um yeah. So it's like that's, you can do some coordination stuff without doing that kind of like creating a shared, there's a phrase for it, a collective imaginary.
Mhm.
I forget where that phrase comes from, just read some article about it, but it's like when you have a sense of like, oh, this is it's a shared sense of kind of what's going on or something, not just like events, but the meaning of the events and the types of stories that those events are participating in. And like,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think the coordination label might be like even a bit too broad, because I think a bunch
Mhm.
of things which are worth talking about on their own kind of end up falling into the coordination label. Uh, I, I like that, like, cultivation of, what you said first, like cultivation of values, and then like a
Mhm.
cultivation of that shared imaginary, where
Mhm.
people make sense of what's happening together, and can can sort of ensure, or like reify that they have the same concepts that they can all refer to in common.
Yeah. And in terms of like what you were saying in terms of like there's a bunch of math that's been sorted out regarding the free energy principle and various other active inference things, but then it's like how do you integrate those into like your actual agent arena relationship? It's like in a way, church can be a context for that. It's like a context that is not just it's not just philosophy, but it's also not just practice. It's like embodied participatory philosophy is, sort of what church is getting at, I think.
Yeah, that's sweet. Yeah, I really like the picture of church being the space for that. It's like you're supposed to do that all the time, but like at church, it's you have there's an allotted time and a physically delimited space where it's like it's for that. It's like you get in the mode to do that, and you do it with other people.
Yeah.
Um,
And you cultivate a shared sense of what you're doing in regard to that.
one thing I'd like to touch on actually,
Mhm.
um, is that it's fine that it's more than fine. It's like likely that there's not like a final thing that we'll figure out, right? It's like it's just this constant unfolding,
Yeah.
never stopping. So it's like, we figure out together what the next step should be,
Yeah, but it's
but
only ever the next step or maybe the next two steps.
yeah, the next few steps, but we can't possibly like project into the future very far off into the future, or like
Totally.
establish this is the telos, and like there's
Yeah.
no it's never going to deviate from it. So
Yeah.
like just cultivating this like epistemic humility and like the methods to keep figuring it out, to keep
Yeah.
like questioning your assumptions and your priors and so on.
Yeah. And this is why, like, from my perspective, any religion or any ideology that sort of claims to be done or be the final answer or the conclusive be all end all is announcing its own deadness. It's announcing its own refusal to participate in the learning process and the unfolding. Like it's sort of saying, like, it's there's a kind of hubristic quality to it. Um,
Although it might be on purpose, it might be on purpose in the sense that, from a game theory like
oh yeah,
security
no,
background.
totally. It can be very mimetically fit to do so,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's only mimetically fit in an environment where people's relationships to memes is one of being dominated by them rather than being in a, a playful, sensible unfolding relationship with them. And like in the long run, I my sense is that memes that can be consciously co-evolved will outcompete, very strong dogmas, even though those have their grip around people quite
Yeah,
tightly.
yeah, yeah. I hope that's true, and that feels like resonant with stuff like spiral dynamics, where it's
Totally.
like, you have very simple things that are maybe not very nice, so like violence and stuff, but as like as you reap the benefits from the coarser policies, strategies, you get like extra resources to invest in like more precision and attunement, and so like the quality of your strategies like keeps improving.
Yeah.
Maybe
Cool. All right.
this
Good
might be
talking, man.
a yeah, yeah, great talking. This might be a nice like endpoint.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
what
All right.